Today, I am joined by Jay Meyer to talk about an increasingly important concept, the PKI fallacy, and what it means for the maturing identity industry. Jay, in addition to having literally written the book on identity, is the Vice President of North American Operations for FaceTech, which, of course, is that famous provider of 3D face biometrics and liveness technologies, well known for its ongoing, and I should also mention pioneering, $600,000 spoof bounty program. Jay, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Now, before we jump into the main topic of the day, I do want to linger a little bit on that spoof bounty, because I had mentioned earlier, you know, our industry is maturing. It's kind of reached a new level of maturity, I would say. And I think a big indication of that is the spoof bounty. You know, it's easy to get in the weeds in biometrics and identity, but at the end of the day, this is the security industry we're talking about, where bounties are a regular thing. They're very, very important. You still maintain the only spoof bounty program that I'm aware of, which is very integral to that. I think it's a really great feather in your cap. But I'll stop gushing. I do want to actually ask you a question here. What benefits have you seen in maintaining the $600,000 spoof bounty program?
Well, it's a good question to lead off. The spoof bounty program, which shameless plug is at www.spoofbounty.com, is something that FaceTech pioneered almost 4 years ago. And we're the only company on the planet, biometrics vendor on the planet, that has a spoof bounty program, at least as far as we know. We recently raised our payout to a potential of $600,000. And the reason is because we want to continue to raise the bar to attract potential hackers and show us where our vulnerabilities might be. And that is the main benefit to us, okay, is we get to see the most current, the most thoughtful, the most conniving spoof attacks and biometric attacks out there. We get to see if our technology can withstand the state of the art in biometric hacking, right? And so far, we're doing pretty well. And from that, it really is the best R&D money we can spend. Almost 4 years ago, we had a couple of incidents where we paid out partial bounties because a couple of different people got part way in. They didn't completely get in. But over that period of time, we've had about 150,000 unique attacks on our system and only paid out twice early on. And we haven't paid out in almost 3.5 years. So, you know, some of our competitors like to talk about their knowledge base and what they're seeing out there. Well, we like to think that we get first glance at these attacks because these attackers are financially motivated to break our systems, right? And we don't, as opposed to someone else that has to actually get hacked and beaten out in the real world, and then they have to report back to their customers or whatever else that they've been spoofed or hacked. And so we don't want to wait for the attack to happen. We want to know what the signature is so we can prevent it from happening to our customers. Make sense?
It does make sense. And it's something I think we'll be talking a little bit more about as we get into the main topic of the day. I mean, the PKI fallacy, it's an exciting term, and but it is, you know, dependent on an acronym here, and I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So first question, easy one, I think. What is the PKI fallacy?
This has gotten a lot of traction, and we think it has turned a lot of heads and changed a lot of minds. Actually, we've opened some eyes, and the PKI fallacy started out as a joke. What I noticed is that identity management schemes are headed largely by cryptographic guys, crypto guys, right? People that are interested in PKI and the binary nature of a PKI cryptographic result, right? It's deterministic is the right word. It's either a or a B, a 0 or a 1, a yes or a no, right? Either the certificate is attached and valid, or it's not. The device is valid or it's not. The data is secure or it's not. And the industry has enjoyed a significant false sense of security, believing that deterministic outcome is universally applicable across the entire identity management scheme. Okay. The problem is that people can't, unless we start implanting chips in people's brains, okay, that we can attach cryptographic certificates and tokens to and credentials to. We can't know who is actually in control of the device. Okay, it doesn't matter how strong the cryptography is, how perfect the binding is between a credential and a device, or the integrity of the data as it's moving, the digital signature, whatever it is. That doesn't matter if the device can be transferred to someone else, because anything that is bound to the device, like a newfangled cryptographically secure credential, can be passed to someone else, because those things are at least 1 degree separated from the human being, right? Biometrics are the only authenticator available today that is derived from a carbon-based life form, right? It is not reliant on an assumption of trust that we know who is in control of the device and therefore in control of the credentials. Mm-hmm. So the vector happens when a fraudster gets control of a validated credential that fraudster doesn't own or have the right to use, but that fraudster uses that credential to access services and assets and domains illegally. Make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, it's actually a really elegant idea here, but I think it's worth taking a step back and understanding how we kind of got to this place where the PKI fallacy is such an important idea in the identity ecosystem. We're recording this 2023. It's a big anniversary year for the biometrics industry. Mm-hmm. Just this February, mm-hmm. we passed the 10-year anniversary of the founding of the FIDO Alliance. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of Touch ID, which is on-device, the first big mainstream commercial on-device thing, biometric authenticator. And for a long time, that position was sort of also supported by the fact that there were some technological limitations for taking identity matching off device. What technological innovations have sort of allowed for in the cloud and on-premise biometrics to actually be feasible?
Well, I think that the technological innovations that are driving on-prem biometric matching is the technological innovations that the hackers are developing. Okay. Right. Between the PKI fallacy is a huge vulnerability, right? And just like kids, when they want to go buy beer, they're underage and they want to go buy beer, they get someone's fake ID, right? The hackers are doing the same thing with driver's licenses and passports and whatever else. You can go buy on the dark web a near perfect, virtually perfect driver's license or a national ID or a passport from anywhere you want, and you can put someone else's legitimate identity data on it and your picture, right? So by all measurements, virtually all measurements, that credential is perfect, and it will enable fraud. It will enable the authentication of a fraudster every single time, okay? Because we won't know the difference. So the fraudsters are figuring out how to get past this cryptography focus that we have, this deterministic focus. And the answer is biometrics, okay? The answer is making sure that we know who is in control of the device and who is therefore in control of the credentials that are bound to the device, right? And because those credentials represent services and privileges that we are granted, right? And though people want to steal them, right? People want to steal those services and those assets that they can get to. So the technological innovations, there's a few other things going on out there. I mean, I think the fact that cybersecurity has continued, cybercrime, I should say, identity theft, online fraud has continued to flourish in spite of the fact that we have all these cryptographically secure devices and data out there and all these wonderful cybersecurity platforms that they don't appear to do anything to stop cybersecurity, right? And the reason is because 85% of cybersecurity attacks are the vector of choice is weak user authentication and weak credentialing systems, right? So we can secure the perimeter all we want, but it makes no difference if we allow anybody that wants to get through the front door, right?
Exactly.
Moving biometrics off of a device and binding the biometric template to or what we call a face map, right? To a verified identity that is proven and irrefutable allows us to authenticate to the biometric that's bound to the identity and not authenticate to something that we have to trust hasn't been passed to someone else. Okay.
Right.
Cryptography works. It works really well. Cryptography works really well on biometric data. It works just as well on biometric data as it does on any other type of data. So when the cryptography guys complain about biometrics and how they're unsafe because it's a probabilistic or a statistical calculation that you are who you say you are, they're really missing a couple points here. The first point is that because human beings are detached from the devices, there's an analog gap there. Any authentication in an unsupervised situation or even a supervised situation, any authentication is a probabilistic outcome, right? Human beings can't really tell that you are who you say you are, even when you're standing in front of them. We're really not that good at it, okay? Computers are better, right? Well, the cryptography that we have available today allows us to pack into the biometric data very securely and send it to a verified identity profile behind someone's firewall where it can be decrypted. So it's very secure. There's no reason to believe we can't move the biometric data anymore. So in a long story short, the combination of the frauds and the identity thefts and the acknowledgement that the cryptography works pretty darn well to move data around, and the benefit of actually knowing that we are authenticating to a proven verified identity, those are the things that are making this possible and changing the way the industry works.
Yeah,
that was kind of long-winded, but
no, I think that
I
works
made the point.
though. I mean, it was a big question and it demanded a big answer, but I think that was good because I mean there's innovation happening on both sides, and I think that really cleared things up, especially talking about the authentication. No matter what, when you're authenticating a user, it's still probabilistic. I mean, that is something that we don't really talk a lot about in our industry, and it's, I think, important to talk about.
It's really important. And it's interesting because the cryptography is based on really sophisticated mathematics, right? It's very elegant. It's cool, right? This is super geek stuff, right? But the one thing that the cryptography crowd doesn't seem to want to acknowledge is that any user authentication is probabilistic. And so in any cybersecurity situation, you have deterministic calculations combined with probabilistic calculations. And when you have the two, the only outcome you can have is a probabilistic outcome. 99% times 100% is 99%, right? Yeah. It's just a fact. So we're getting real about this type of thing, and people are starting to accept that there's a better way of doing things.
Yeah. Well, and it's great. But I would be remiss to leave out the fact that like some very big parties are still on the on-device thing. I mean, if you're like me, and people watching this have probably been reading the articles about Apple's new optic ID on their AR headset, which is still on device. And that is, mainstream folks are still using that party line of, thank goodness this is
Yeah.
privacy protecting, et cetera, but it still has
Yeah.
the same problem that you were just quite elegantly putting
Right.
forward there. And but before I drag Apple through the mud, I do want to point out, like, credit where credit's due. They do have some really strong technologies at
Yeah.
the heart of it. I mean, the fact that
Yeah.
they're using iris biometrics on a commercial headset, on a consumer grade headset, is
Right.
wild. But I would say, like, even more impressive, I think, and they maybe don't get enough credit for this, is the Face ID, which uses LiDAR technology, is a 3D face biometric, which
Mhm.
is just kind of otherwise unheard of, specifically on commercial devices, except
Two vendors can do it.
there are two. Well, and that's actually my question. So FaceTech, obviously, famously, I
Right.
mentioned before, you use 3D face biometrics. You do 3D face
Yeah.
matching, 3D face mapping,
Yeah.
and 3D liveness.
Yeah.
What are the advantages of 3D versus the standard 2D that you get usually?
Well, there are huge advantages of 3D face. I mean, besides the fact that we use our faces for all of our identity management systems, our driver's license has a picture of your face, your passport has a face. They're required to have a picture of your face, right?
Mhm.
Our brains are wired to recognize faces, at least some faces, right? Like our mother. How do you know who your mother is? Because you can recognize her face. You may not be able to tell the guy standing in front of you to buy beer is the same guy that's represented by the driver's license, but you will be able to tell your mom's face, right?
Mhm.
So the thing about we call it device native biometrics. That biometric data is not bound to identity data anywhere, right? It's what I call anonymous data. That it's in a secure enclave or a secure module or a cryptographic module. It's in a it's in a chip inside of the phone or the device that cryptographically secures the biometric data that is collected when you enroll on the device, right? But that data is not bound to verified identity data anywhere. And if you have the PIN for the device, you can change the data to anyone else's data, right? So those, and we're seeing a lot of articles right now that are showing that the device native biometrics really are pretty poor biometrics besides the 3D stuff, right? They're easy to spoof. They're not accurate, okay? And that gets to the first reason why 3D is good. And I'm going to differentiate between 3D and 2D, and then I'm going to differentiate between our 3D and Apple's 3D, okay?
Mhm.
One of the big problems with two-dimensional face matching is a thing called perspective distortions. Okay, you literally are trying to capture three-dimensional data with a two-dimensional sensor. Okay, the camera is two-dimensional, right? And as you change the depth of field, right? You create what are called perspective distortions. The 2D sensor can't interpret 3D data properly the way our eyes can, right? And so the image starts to flatten out, right? It gets rounder, right? And those
Mhm.
perspective distortions create errors for 2D based face matching systems, okay? So those errors mean that the systems that are on the phones don't typically work very well. They're inaccurate. And so the vendor has to tune it to make sure that the right person doesn't get boxed out, right? They make it easy for the right person to get boxed out. They make it inaccurate enough so that the right person never gets boxed out of their phone. But what that means is that it's also going to allow a certain percentage of the incorrect people into the phone, right?
Mhm.
And so that trade-off is starting to come to roost, right? So what Apple did was monkey around with 3D, and they have sensors in their phones. They have a infrared projector that sends about 60,000 beams of light to your face, and then they have a special camera that measures all of those distances, and from that it creates a 3D composite of your face. Okay,
Mhm.
very accurate. 3D is extremely accurate because it's not prone to the perspective distortions that all the other systems are, right? But also because 3D collects orders of magnitude more data. And in a probabilistic, a statistical calculation, the more data that you can measure, the higher potential confidence you can have in the measurement outcome. Okay. So instead of measuring just X and Y coordinate data, we're measuring X, Y, and Z, right? Depth. So we have a lot more data to work with, which means that our accuracy can be potentially orders of magnitude better than the other stuff out there. Okay.
Mhm.
So at FaceTech, we think that at our system, our calculations show that at a 1% false reject rate, we have a false accept rate of 1 in 120, almost 125 million people, right? And that is substantial. It's not even in the same ballpark as other technologies. So 3D face is just far superior, okay? Apple's system, however, requires expensive devices that are embedded in the phone, right? And that makes the phone more expensive. Apple's iPhones are among the most expensive phones on the market, and many would call that as economically biased, okay? People that can't afford an iPhone cannot enjoy the benefits of the 3D face matching that Apple has on their phone, right?
Mhm.
So FaceTech figured out that those perspective distortions actually are unique to you, right? Your face creates unique perspective distortions. And from that, we use very sophisticated AI to generate a three-dimensional composite that's measured through a series of video frames that we collect as you move your face back and forth across about 6 inches away, right? And we can create that on phones that are very old and have very low resolution cameras. Our minimum resolution is 0.3 megapixels. Okay. So our systems, our technology is backward compatible. And so we're exploding in the developing economies around the world. People that can't afford expensive phones can afford cheaper phones, and they can download our software and still get the same accuracy rates that you get with Apple. Make
Mhm.
sense?
That does. And it's like music to my ears. I know you and I've talked about this before, but like one of my big things in identity is that everybody's got an identity. We all have bodies. We shouldn't I don't think that we should only allow people to have with money to have great,
Right.
identity verification online.
Well, it's a big deal, and the civil rights advocates are on top of that, right?
Mhm.
You can't disregard people because they don't have enough money to buy an iPhone. They
Yeah,
still deserve the same services that everybody else deserves, right?
exactly. Especially when we start to talk about these like more fundamental use cases like voting, filing your
Yeah.
taxes,
Well, in
dare
a
I say.
remote, unsupervised environment, that's really important. I mean, the
Exactly.
pandemic showed us how important it is. The fraud statistics are alarming, which
Mhm.
brings up another point about 3D face. Okay, 3D face provides, at FaceTech, we're all about liveness. Okay,
Yeah.
if you can't determine liveness, the person sitting in front of the phone is actually it is actually a living human being in front of the phone instead of maybe a projection or a picture or some type of spoof attack, some high resolution screen. You don't have anything. The accuracy doesn't matter if it can be spoofed if the liveness doesn't count, right? So what three-dimensional face allows us to do is derive certain types of liveness data from the same data flow that the matching data is pulled from. Okay, so when the sensor captures face matching data, it's also capturing face liveness data. And in a sense, it's the same data. Okay. It comes from the same data flow. We secure the sensor, we secure the data flow from the sensor, right? So we know what the data is, we know where it came from, right? I mean, and if we can see the data has the wrong resolution, we know it's an injection attack, right? For example, right? But then we can encrypt the data because encryption works, remember everybody, and we can send it behind someone's firewall, right? Like at the DMV,
Mhm.
where once it's behind the firewall, we decrypt it and then we immediately check for liveness. Okay. Is the person that presented them, is it a live person in front of that phone, or is it a picture or whatever, right? Well, 3D is amazing because if you can, a very rudimentary example of why 3D is important, you know, the spoof attacks are very sophisticated. The AI that attackers are using is every bit as sophisticated as the AI that's being used for good stuff out there, right? Because they have a lot of money that they can steal. So they're using very high performance software and injection attacks, and they're using very high performance presentation attacks, high def, 4K high def screens, and that to us appear almost 3D, right? Well, the thing about 3D faces is that we know a human being is alive if they have we know that a living human being must have a three-dimensional face, right? So if we can determine two-dimensionality of what's being presented, right, then we know that it's not a living human being because it has to be 3D. We use about 60 different types of liveness calculations. They're all passive. We don't really disclose them because we don't want the attackers to know what we do. But once we confirm liveness, then we can delete the liveness data, okay? And that leaves just matching data, which we then bind to the verified identity. And once it's bound to the verified identity, we have verified biometric data bound to a verified identity. We have the whole picture, you know, pardon the pun, right? We can authenticate to that and know exactly if it is the right person or not. So 3D has some huge advantages, and you know, face has advantages over all the others anyway. Who wants to buy a $4,000 headset anyway? Iris, you know, that's great, but I'll wait till it's
I have enough screens
$40.
in my own reality, if to editorialize a bit. But you know, you mentioned earlier that we're at kind of a point where some of these issues are coming back to roost, and one of those that, like, I think probably everybody now has finally had experience with, because you know we've been through this with multiple generations, is the account recovery problem with on-device, or you know, device native biometrics. And this is not just a biometric thing as either. This is for, you know, your regular authenticator apps as well. But if your phone bricks, and they are, you know, they do this, there's planned obsolescence in the way that we have our device economy right now, then all of a sudden you have to re-enroll or find a way to recover, which, in addition to being inconvenient, is also a security threat as well. And so I'm wondering, you know, how does taking biometrics off device kind of solve this problem, and then, you know, even further, allow for a, you know, a identity transferability even across devices?
Sure. So this goes back to the PKI fallacy a little bit, right? Because there's these new things out there called mobile driver's licenses, and you know, face tech is the biometric of choice for a number of state mobile driver's licenses. What we found is that in some situations, in some states where we were not involved, okay, a hacker was able to steal someone's identity data and then ask the DMV in that state to provision a mobile driver's license to the attacker's phone. It was the mobile driver's license of the person whose identity he stole, right? So he was able to get a stolen mobile driver's license provisioned to his phone, and then he was able to borrow money using that phone, and he was able to buy cars and things like that, right? And it was a big deal, right? So that state then came to us and said, well, we need to do what you do, because we had no way of knowing that this guy wasn't the guy that is supposed to have the driver's license, right? So it comes to the problem with these cryptographic systems today is that because we can't know who's actually in control of the device, right, without the proper biometric architecture, then it means we can't provision cryptographic and digital credentials to the device in an unsupervised situation. If we can't know who's in charge of the phone, then we can't take the risk of provisioning to that phone, okay? I mean, a mobile driver's license could easily be just sent to the phone and held in a wallet, but you can't do that because you don't know who's in charge of the phone, really, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing goes with authenticating somebody for high value transactions in an unsupervised situation. If you don't know who's in charge of the phone, you can't really trust to know who is trying to access the credentials and the privileges that are associated with them that are bound to that phone. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, so what that means is in these systems that are out there, like verifiable credentials and the new mobile driver's license standard and self-sovereign identity systems, I mean, cryptographically, they're cool, but they lack this one particular element, which is identity verification and true, strong authentication, right? Moving the biometric to the identity profile at the DMV or wherever it is. I mean, the architecture is the same. You could do this in a human resources environment, in a corporate environment. You could do this with a State Department for passports. You could do this with national ID cards. You could do this with health cards. Your insurance company could set this up. If they have a verified identity profile somewhere, they can bind your biometric to it and then authenticate to that every time. So getting to your question about enrolling and re-enrolling and what if you lose the phone? Well, the systems that are out there today require in-person provisioning, right? You have to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and stand in line and have them manually provision to your phone, right? And then they still have to trust that you're not going to hand the phone to someone else, right? Or that someone isn't going to steal your phone, right? So remote authentication is still a problem, which limits the viability of the mobile driver's license out in the ecosystem, right? You can't trust who's in control of the driver's license. So if you move the biometric data to the profile and authenticate and you verify an identity to that, it is safe enough to provision a mobile driver's license or something like that, a verifiable credential, to the device, because you know that the person holding the device is the person that's entitled to have that credential, right? If they lose their phone, the same kind of thing happens, right? They can get a new phone, they can petition, they can download the right wallet or whatever it is. They can ask the DMV or the State Department or whoever it is to provision a new credential to the new phone, right? And rather than risking not knowing who's in control of the device, you can authenticate that person in virtual real time because you've collected a biometric and it's attached to the verified identity. So it's no longer important that the person go into the DMV or into the State Department office or wherever, the National ID Center, to get a manually in-person provisioned credential to their device. You can do it online. And in fact, the states that are using our technology for their mobile driver's license are able to do this right now. The state of Utah is doing this right now on renewal, right? They take an image, they take a face scan of your face, they encrypt it, they send it to the DMV behind the DMV firewall. It's decrypted behind the firewall where they check for liveness. Liveness data is then deleted, leaving only matching data, a face map, and that is matched against the stored face map for the identity profile. And if it matches, then you can have your new mobile driver's license, your renewed driver's license, whatever it is, provisioned to your phone right then and there into your wallet. So moving biometrics off of the phone avoids this anonymous biometrics and this trust problem we have with who's in control of the phone. And it allows us to provision and renew credentials and identity systems it allows us to provision and renew those things in a remote, unsupervised way that we cannot do otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I think I just want to expand on something that you mentioned, I think is really interesting, because I think that the argument for having the source of record come from the government feels very natural. But you mentioned a whole bunch of other parties that could also be doing this. You mentioned insurance companies, you mentioned HR departments. I'm really interested in sort of how this concept of on-prem biometrics can move from the government, and why the government is great, but also how your workplace could use the same kind of
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah. Well, the government provides, in every society on the planet, the government
Mhm.
provides the anchor identity, who we are out in the marketplace, right? Your in the United States, the driver's license is the de facto national ID, right?
Yeah.
It is a government issued credential that says this is Jay Meyer. It tells everything. It's the verified identity data about Jay Meyer. It has my face on it, so you know that my face is Jay Meyer, right? And it associates with privileges. Well, not if we have that anchored, okay, it works for government related stuff and very high value related transactions that you might apply for, like a bank account, right? The bank may require a driver's license, and they may require to know that you're the person that's allowed to have that driver's license when they ask for your face to be verified against what's stored at the DMV. But the architecture is the same, okay? Whether it's in a corporate environment or a government related environment or whatever, the architecture is the same. So take we have thousands of customers. We've got 150, I guess it's 100 integration partners around the world that do this stuff as a service. We don't know who their customers are, right? But we also have thousands of customers that do this, like Tinder is a good example. They use our technology, right? When you enroll, Peter, you're not using Tinder, are you?
No, no, I'm
Well,
getting there.
if you were, you would enroll on Tinder, you would apply for the account, whatever it is, pay the bill, right? And then you would have a user profile there. And they will capture a face scan from your phone, transfer it behind their firewall, check for liveness to make sure it's not a spoof, right? They'll delete the liveness data and bind the biometric face map to the account profile. And then every time you want to go out on a date or whatever it is, and you're scrolling, every time you authenticate to the app, it matches against what's stored in the account profile.
Right.
Same thing with a human resources, system, like, a large company might have thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees scattered around, right? And they all have to integrate with the portal for corporate, right? They all have to do whatever they do in the corporate network, right? So when you apply for a job, the company does, a background check on you. They do due diligence on you. They determine who they think you are, and when they're comfortable and they believe you'd be a good asset for the company, they hire you, right? So they have this information in a profile in their human resources department, right? They oftentimes take your picture anyway and put it in a badge, right? They could take the biometric data and bind it to the human resources profile. And then anytime someone wants to log on to the corporate systems, whatever they are, they can authenticate to that instead of relying on the anonymous nonsense that's embedded in these devices, right? They don't have to trust who's in control of the phone. They actually know who's in control of the device. Make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think that, there's something to be said about a lot of these processes already happening, just in like a less assured way. This is not like some new idea that is being, dropped in. This is just a better, more assured way of doing things. I do want to spend some time a little bit talking about sort of the privacy issue, because when we talk about these things, it's like, you take things off of a device that you own and put it in somebody else's database. Alarm bells do go off in some people's minds. We've been talking a little bit about 10 years ago, right in the wake of, or Touch ID was sort of launched in the wake of some of the, NSA PRISM stuff that was very scary. And so people were, very scared of what the government would do. So I guess my question is, how does this paradigm, this like post PKI fallacy paradigm of identity, kind of empower folks with their privacy?
Well, there's a lot of bad information out there, right? I mean, the crypto guys and the privacy advocates and the companies that want to keep selling you devices, they want you to believe that biometric data is dangerous, right? It's probabilistic and whatever. And if you lose your biometric data, your whole life is going to end. And otherwise, if you're giving your biometric data to the government and using it to authenticate yourself out there in the marketplace, then you're giving the government the opportunity to follow you around and track what you're doing. That's really an Orwellian, scary thing in the court of public opinion, but the technology actually doesn't. That's not a problem. Okay, it's a solved issue, right? Yeah, we don't want the government tracking people around. And at FaceTech, we don't touch any customer data, right? We build tools that other companies build into their platforms, right? We never see any customer data, and we survived the BIPL lawsuit because that it was dismissed. But when you move biometric data to the DMV, for example, right, and then if you're choosing to authenticate to that every time, it could, if the architecture and the system was designed in a bad way, it could give the government ideas about what you're doing. But you don't have to architect it that way, right? The cryptographic module in the phone that holds your biometric has an API system associated with it, and it issues a token. When you log on to the phone, it matches your face against what's stored in the stored value in the phone, and then it spits out a yes or a no. Did it match or didn't it? Right? You can do the same thing at the DMV, right? So if I need to verify my identity, I can query the DMV and they can capture my face, associate it with a driver's license number, and the system will spit out a token that says yes or no, the face matches or it doesn't. That token is time stamped, okay? The token says that just moments ago, this guy holding the device was verified as the guy that's listed in the DMV, right? So when it sends the token back to your device, it's held in your wallet, the consumer's wallet, just with all the other credentials that the consumer has control of, all the credentials that we want the consumer to have control of, right? Then we can protect their privacy. At that point, the consumer has the option to pass that token to a relying party, a service provider, someplace that they're trying to open an account, like a bank, right? If you want to, you can pass the token to the bank, and the bank can see, oh, that person's face was matched successfully against the one stored at that DMV, right? And it was done 15 minutes ago. Well, the bank might say that's not good enough. So they might say, we need you to do it again. Current, we need it within 3 minutes, right? So you query the system again, you swipe or whatever mechanism is used, and it takes a face scan, matches the face map against the stored value at the DMV, sends the API token back with a fresh timestamp milliseconds ago that you can then pass at your option, pass from your wallet to the bank. And the bank can know that this guy's face, this live human being, is the same face that's stored at the DMV within moments. Okay, that is a big deal. So how does that preserve privacy? Well, it means that the bank, the government has no way to know what you're doing with the token. All the government knows is that you're refreshing the token, right? They don't know where you passed it. They have no way to know if you're opening an account at Tinder or opening an account at a bank or whatever you're doing with it, right? So it preserves privacy. And there's new ways to do this too. I mean, we have a new technology called a face vector, which doesn't even use face matching at the DMV. It just it matches hashed values at the DMV. So, which are ones and zeros effectively, right? I mean, there's no risk. So the privacy is there. People can maintain the control of their tokens and their identities and their biometric data and feel secure. And we can eliminate a lot of fraud out there by doing this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, we're just about out of time here, but I think we've covered quite a bit, and you've really painted a picture of how this paradigm works in practice. And I think, especially when you're talking about mobile driver's licenses, how
Mhm.
it could really underpin the emerging digital identity infrastructure we're seeing,
Mhm.
not just in North America, but I know we're seeing it in Africa, we're seeing it in Southeast Asia, we're seeing
Yeah,
it essentially all over the place. But
right.
we've also been talking about, like, to tie things together, there is still a very strong element of on-device push in our society. So I'm wondering, my last question, is there actually traction for this sort of post-peak AI fallacy identity? And is there hope that we're going to start to see this mode of identity, work its way into the foundation of
Oh,
the, identity utility that
yeah.
hopefully we'll start to see?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I already mentioned the state of Utah that's
Yeah.
doing this exact thing, right? There are several other states that are using our technology for those very same purposes. Okay. It's being utilized out there. They are choosing not to rely on device native biometrics for all the reasons that we've already discussed. There are companies, we have, like I said, we have 100 integration partners. These are service providers that provide identity verification services and identity authentication services to whoever their customers are, right? They're
Mhm.
doing the same thing, and it's working for them. We have direct customers, like I mentioned, Tinder, that are using this, right? It works very well and it's very efficient and it's much more secure. The combination of 3D face, 3D liveness, okay, securely moving the encrypted data behind a firewall and decrypting it, checking liveness, deleting liveness data, binding to the profile, we know who is on the other end. I just gave a speech in Sydney recently, just 10 days ago or a couple weeks ago, and there were government representatives from 20 different countries there that listened to my speech, and a substantial number of them approached me afterwards to say, look, we're trying to do that very thing right now. We know this makes sense, right? If
Mhm.
for no other reason, for the renewal, they want to be able to provision remotely, right, for the renewed driver's license. Well, they can do a lot more with it, but that's their goal. And so we're seeing this all around the world, right? The government is the anchor identity data for us, right?
Mhm.
I like to say you are who the government says you are, right? So now we need to verify our identities out in the remote ecosystem against that confirmed verified government data. Make sense?
It does, yeah. And that's a really hopeful note, I think, to end on, Jay. So thank you so much for this conversation. One last thing before we go, though. How can viewers who are watching this and they want to know more get in touch with you
Yeah.
to do that?
Well, you can reach me at jay@facetech.com, JAY at Facetech, FACETEC.com. Don't forget about spoofbounty.com or liveness.com if you want to learn everything you need to know about liveness. And you can reach me at 612-978-3687. And I'll answer any questions you have.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Jay. I always love having these conversations, and I can't wait for our next one.
Thanks a lot, Peter. I enjoy it too. Have a great day.
You too.